The world is about to witness an economic coup that could shake the entire planet. And the secret weapon isn't gold or diamonds, but an animal the whole world has laughed at. In one of the poorest nations in West Africa, Burkina Faso, a young president, Ibrahim Traore, is launching a plan that CIA and Wall Street economists have called insane. Raising millions of donkeys. This is not some trivial agricultural project. This is a declaration of war on poverty, a gamble that could transform Burkina Faso from a forgotten nation into a powerhouse, or plunge it into the depths of despair. A hidden plan, a truth that Western powers never want you to know. If you have ever felt underestimated, looked down upon simply because of where you come from, leave a like and join me in uncovering this earth-shattering secret. Part 2. I know what you're thinking. Donkeys? In the 21st century, when the world is racing ahead with AI and nuclear energy, a nation is betting its future on an animal from thousands of years ago. That is precisely the arrogance that outside forces want to plant in our minds. To understand Traore's madness, we must look directly at the bleeding wound of Burkina Faso, a rich land where pure gold flows from the earth, where fields of white cotton stretch for thousands of acres. But its people are among the poorest and most miserable on the planet. Their resources are siphoned away, flowing into the pockets of multinational corporations, leaving behind children with no schools and mothers with no medicine. Ibrahim Traore saw through this bitter paradox. He realized that his people's salvation did not lie in the things the world coveted, but in the very things they had overlooked, the things right in front of their eyes. The answer came to Traore not on a dusty battlefield in the Sahel, but in a lavish glass and steel conference room in Rome, Italy. He arrived there, a young leader from a nation most Western politicians could only find on a map after several wrong guesses, to attend an economic summit. The air was thick with self-satisfaction. He was surrounded by expensive suits, polite but empty smiles, and speeches about development aid and partnerships, hollow words that masked a system that had been sucking the life out of Africa for centuries. He felt the weight of 30 million people on his shoulders. Every handshake, every polite smile, reminded him of the villages without clean water, the hospitals without medicine back home. He was the voice for the voiceless, and here, his voice seemed lost in the clinking of crystal glasses. During a tense session, a waiter quietly placed a finely cut glass in front of him. Inside was a simple-looking, milky white liquid. Thinking it was ordinary cow's milk, but being naturally cautious, he turned to his host, a powerful Italian industrialist, and asked, "Excuse me, what kind of milk is this?" The man smiled, a smile that was part pride, part condescension. "Oh, Mr. President, this is no ordinary milk." He took a sip from his own glass. "This is donkey milk, the finest quality. We elites in Europe use it to improve our health, to beautify our skin. We call it liquid gold." Liquid, gold. Those two words struck Ibrahim Traore like a bolt of lightning. The luxurious room suddenly vanished. The surrounding chatter faded away. For a moment, he was no longer in Rome. He was back on the dusty red roads of Burkina Faso. He saw the images of donkeys, skinny, with sad eyes, their backs breaking under heavy loads in the scorching sun. They were beaten, chased away, seen as symbols of stupidity and stubbornness. Back home, they were the embodiment of hardship, of a life of toil. They were the property of the poor, nothing more than a beast of burden. And yet here, thousands of miles from his homeland, in the heart of wealth and power, the milk from those same despised animals was being compared to gold, sold for hundreds of dollars a gallon, hunted by cosmetic companies for anti-aging creams that cost a fortune. The truth was so stark and ironic it was almost laughable, a truth that no economic expert, no aid organization had ever told him. A cold fury began to rise in Traore's veins. They took the gold from our ground. They took the cotton from our fields. They set the price for everything, controlled everything, and then turned around to grant us trickles of aid from the very wealth they had stolen. But they had made a mistake. They overlooked the donkeys. They had scorned them, just as they had scorned his people. In their arrogance, they had revealed the ultimate weapon right before their enemies' eyes. It wasn't just milk, it was a symbol of sovereignty, a resource that Burkina Faso held completely, not controlled by the London Stock Exchange or corporations in Paris, a path to determine their own destiny. In that instant, Ibrahim-Traore changed. The despair in his eyes vanished, replaced by a determined fire. He was no longer a young leader who had come to listen. He had become a warrior who had just found his sword. He took a sip of the milk. The taste was clean, unfamiliar. It was the taste of a revolution. Have you ever, in a sudden moment, looked at something familiar and everyday and realized its hidden value that the entire world has missed? Share that experience in the comments, because it is from moments like these that revolutions are born. He smiled back at the Italian industrialist, a genuine smile for the first time that day. But it was no longer polite. It was the smile of a man who now knew his opponent's secret. The plane carrying Ibrahim Traore back to Ouagadougou didn't just bring home a president. It brought back an idea, a flame. As he stepped off the plane, breathing in the hot, dry air of his homeland, he no longer saw a land of poverty. He saw an untapped gold mine, an army of millions of four-legged soldiers awaiting their orders. The red dust of the Sahel was no longer a symbol of barrenness. It was the stage for a revolution. That very night, he called an emergency meeting with his cabinet seasoned battlefield generals, technocratic ministers, and respected tribal elders. In the modest meeting room, under a pale yellow light, he didn't talk about aid or military campaigns. He began to talk about donkeys. A stunned silence filled the room. The army general, who had been through life and death with him, frowned. "Mr. President?" he interrupted, his voice full of doubt. "We are in a state of war. Terrorist groups are running rampant in the north. People in many regions are short on food. And you want us to focus on raising donkeys?" An economist, trained in Paris, followed up more politely but just as sharply. "Sir, with all due respect, economic models show no potential from large-scale donkey farming. The costs would be enormous. The market is unstable. It's an irrational risk." Skepticism spread like a toxic cloud. They looked at him as if he had lost his mind after his trip to Europe. To them, donkeys were donkeys. They were the past, not the future. Traore stood up, his eyes sweeping over each familiar face. He wasn't angry. He knew he had to face this. This was the first, and perhaps the hardest, barrier, changing the mindset of his own closest allies. "I saw it," he said, his voice low and firm. "In Rome, I saw them selling milk from our donkeys for the price of gold. They call it liquid gold. They drink it to live longer, to be more beautiful, while those same animals die of exhaustion in our homeland." He recounted the story from the meeting in Italy, recreating the irony, the humiliation in the industrialist's smile. "They laugh at us because we are poor. They look down on us because we are backward. Now we will use the very thing they despise to rebuild this nation. We will make them pay a high price for their own ignorance." He wasn't talking about economics. He was talking about honor. He wasn't talking about agriculture. He was talking about sovereignty. The fire in his eyes began to spread to the others. The old general fell silent, his calloused hand clenching into a fist. He might not understand economics, but he understood asymmetrical warfare, turning weakness into strength. The female minister of agriculture, a woman who grew up in a poor village, began to see a path to empower millions of rural women. But Traore knew words were not enough. He needed proof. Immediately, he secretly formed a research group gathering the best scientists, doctors, and agronomists in Burkina Faso. He gave them one order: analyze everything. "I want to know exactly what is in this liquid gold." The results that came back a few weeks later exceeded even his wildest imagination. The scientific reports, written in dry language, contained an exhilarating truth. Donkey milk had incredibly high levels of omega-3 and omega-6, essential fatty acids for brain development. Its zinc and calcium concentrations were many times higher than cow's milk, a potential cure for stunted children. It contained powerful antibacterial enzymes and anti-allergenic proteins, a possible salvation for thousands suffering from skin and respiratory diseases. It wasn't just a luxury product, it was a superfood, a natural medicine. With these reports in hand, Traore convened his cabinet once more. This time, there was no skepticism, only astonishment. His crazy plan now had a solid scientific foundation. And then, he revealed the true scale of his vision. This isn't about a few farms, he declared. This will be a national mobilization. We will establish hundreds of modern processing plants, built to the standards of the American FDA and the European Union. We will build a cold chain supply line from the most remote villages to the seaports. We will retrain millions of farmers, transforming them from subsistence herders into industrial specialists. We won't just sell milk. We will sell soap, skin creams, pharmaceuticals. We will create a multi-billion-dollar industry from scratch. The room was silent. But this time, it was the silence of being overwhelmed by a vision so immense. The engine of the revolution had been started. The wheels of Burkina Faso's history began to turn in a completely new direction. From the national radio, Ibrahim Traore's voice reached every village, every market, every remote hut. This was no ordinary political speech. This was a call to arms. He didn't call it an economic plan. He called it the dignity revolution and the final battle against poverty. He declared the donkey, once a symbol of toil, to be an official national treasure. Every farmer who owned a donkey was no longer a simple herder. They were soldiers in Burkina Faso's new economic army. His words, amplified by thousands of old radios, lit a fire of hope across the nation. And then, action followed words. The greatest mobilization in the country's history began, not with guns and bullets, but with hammers, trowels, and welding torches. From the ashes of despair, the steel frames of the future began to rise across the countryside. Modern milk processing plants, designed to meet the strictest food safety standards of Europe and America, sprouted on land that once grew only weeds. Engineers worked day and night, alongside thousands of local workers, who for the first time in their lives held modern tools, building a future for their own children. In parallel, another, quieter revolution was taking place. Thousands of farmer field schools opened. Here, farmers, many of whom had never learned to read, were taught science by agricultural experts. They learned how to identify nutritious grasses, how to vaccinate donkeys, how to use solar-powered milking machines to ensure absolute hygiene, how to test milk quality right at the stable. Their status was changing. They were no longer passive laborers, but skilled agricultural technicians, the first and most crucial link in a billion-dollar value chain. In a small village in the south, a young man named Adama, who had known nothing but poverty since birth, enrolled in the first course. His father and grandfather had spent their lives breaking their backs on the arid land, only to end up with failed crops. For Adama, President Traore's plan wasn't just a policy. It was a miracle, the only way out. He listened intently, took careful notes, his eyes shining with belief in a future he never dared to dream of. But not everyone was so optimistic. An elder in Adama's village, old Issouf, who had seen countless government promises vanish into thin air, just shook his head. "It's the city people again," he muttered to Adama as he watched him clean the brand-new milking machine. "They come, they promise, they stir things up, and then they leave. Only the dust remains forever." Old Issouf's skepticism wasn't malicious. It was the bitter wisdom forged from generations of neglect, an invisible wall that Traore's revolution had to overcome. And then, as hope began to take root in Burkina Faso, the outside world started to notice. At first, there was ridicule. Major news agencies like Reuters and the Associated Press published condescending articles, calling it the bizarre donkey plan of a fledgling African military regime. They saw it as a joke, a final act of desperation from a failed state. But when the first images of the modern factories and the scale of the training program spread, ridicule turned to concern. The tone began to change. The giant pharmaceutical and cosmetic corporations in Europe, the ones dominating the high-end market, started to feel uneasy. A new competitor was rising from an unexpected place, with an abundant supply of raw materials and extremely low production costs. They could not sit idly by. The first attack didn't come with bombs. It was far more sophisticated. A scientific study, funded by an anonymous independent health fund in Belgium, was suddenly published in a prestigious medical journal. The paper questioned the hidden dangers in donkey milk, suggesting it could contain unidentified bacteria and cause digestive problems in Western consumers. There was no concrete proof, only vague language and general warnings. But its purpose was clear: to sow fear and doubt, to destroy the reputation of Burkina Faso's liquid gold before it could even reach the market. The shadow of sabotage had begun to fall. The real war, an unequal war, was just beginning. The report from Belgium struck a heavy blow to the heart of the young revolution. In the meeting room in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere was more tense than during a military coup. This time, the enemy was invisible, faceless, and its weapon was printed words on paper that could destroy everything before they sold a single gallon of milk. The ministers were worried. "We can't win a media war," one said, his voice dejected. "They have the money, the major television channels, the influence. What do we have? The truth? The truth is worthless if no one hears it." Ibrahim Traore listened to it all, his face expressionless. He let the fear and confusion rise to its peak in the room. Then he tapped his hand lightly on the table, a sound not loud, but enough to command silence. "If they want to fight," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "we will give them a fight. But we will not fight by their rules. We will not be defensive. We will attack." He didn't call a press conference to deny the allegations. That was exactly what they expected. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He used the ultimate weapon of someone with nothing to hide: absolute transparency. In a live address broadcast in both English and French, Traore looked directly into the camera and made a public invitation to the entire world, to the journalists, the scientists, the health experts, and even to those who doubt us the most. He declared, "I, Ibrahim Traore, President of Burkina Faso, officially invite you to our country. Your plane tickets and accommodation will be covered by our government. Come here, bring your cameras, bring your testing kits. Go into any factory you wish. Take any milk sample you choose. Talk to any farmer you meet. We have nothing to hide. Come and see the truth for yourselves." It was a genius move, an all-in gamble. It turned the enemy's attack into a massive promotional opportunity. At the same time, his government launched a truth offensive on social media. They didn't release slick propaganda videos. They released real stories. Short clips, filmed on phones, showed the once skeptical old farmer, Issouf, now smiling with pride as he taught his grandson how to read the indicators on the milk quality tester. They showed Adama receiving his first payment, more money than his father had earned in a year, which he used to buy medicine for his mother. They told the story of an all-female cooperative who were handcrafting their first bars of soap, naming it Faso soap, wrapped in paper hand drawn with traditional patterns. While the information war was raging, the first fruits of the revolution took shape. The factories began to produce their first products. Not just pasteurized bottled milk. There were also the first national cosmetic lines: Sahel Serum, an anti-aging serum, and Burkina Beauty, a hand cream for laborers. Their formulas were simple: pure donkey milk, organic shea butter, and local herbs. Their story was even more powerful: no chemicals, made by the hands of African women, and every product sold would help build a school. Traore's invitation, initially ignored, began to gain traction. A few adventurous travel bloggers, some freelance journalists tired of the mainstream narrative, accepted the offer. They arrived with skepticism. But what they saw changed everything. They saw factories as clean as any in Europe. They saw healthy, well-cared-for donkeys. And most importantly, they saw hope in the eyes of the people. The first articles and videos from these independent sources began to appear, telling a story completely different from what the corporations wanted the world to believe. The wall of lies began to show its first cracks. Right now, as you are hearing this story, An information war is being fought. Will you choose to believe the anonymous reports from corporations or the images of farmers striving to change their own lives? Comment steadfast if you stand with Burkina Faso, or skeptical if you believe the attacks. Your choice shows where the world truly stands. The cracks in the wall of lies quickly spread. The story of Ibrahim Traore's bold invitation and the silence of the major corporations became a hot topic on internet forums. Public pressure, stirred by the articles from independent journalists, forced the major media outlets to act. A prestigious investigative program from Al Jazeera sent a team to Burkina Faso. They didn't come for a feel-good story. They came for the truth. And the truth they found shook the world. Their report, broadcast globally, juxtaposed two opposing images. On one side, sterile laboratories, well-trained farmers, and drops of pure liquid gold. On the other, a network of shell companies, ghost health funds, and finally, they traced the funding for the slanderous article in Belgium. It led directly to a giant pharmaceutical competitor in Europe. The attack was exposed. David hadn't just dodged Goliath's stone. He had used that very stone to shatter the giant's mask. This media victory threw open the doors to the world. A few weeks later, even more shocking news reached Ouagadougou. Aura Organics, a high-end organic cosmetics company based in California, famous for its fair trade policies and environmental commitments, publicly announced it would partner with Burkina Faso. They didn't just place a small order. They signed a multi-million-dollar contract, committing to buy the country's donkey milk output for the next 5 years. The news exploded like fireworks. When Traore announced it to his cabinet, the very generals and ministers who had once been skeptical stood up and gave him a roaring ovation. For the first time in decades, an African nation had created its own high-value product and negotiated an equal contract with the West without needing aid. That night, the people of Ouagadougou poured into the streets to celebrate. The sound of drums and singing echoed late into the night. The crazy plan had succeeded. And that success wasn't just numbers on a page, it was changing real lives. In Adama's village, the money from the Aura Organics contract was distributed to the cooperatives. With the money he earned, Adama did two things. First, he installed a small solar panel system on the roof of his family's thatch hut. That night, for the first time in his family's history, Adama's younger siblings could study under the light of an electric bulb, not a flickering oil lamp. Second, he and 5 other young men in the village pooled their money to buy an old tractor. A whole generation had watched their fathers break their backs tilling the soil. Now, they were sitting on a machine, preparing for a new harvest. It was light, knowledge, and power. The revolution was becoming real. In every home. But success always comes at a price. The light of prosperity also attracts the phantoms of darkness. The extremist jihadist groups in the Sahel, who thrive on chaos and poverty to recruit members, saw Traore's success as an existential threat. A strong government and a well-fed populace would leave no room for their ideology of hate. They decided they had to extinguish this flame. One fateful morning, a convoy of refrigerated trucks, carrying the first shipment of liquid gold worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to the export port, was rolling down a deserted highway. This was the fruit of months of labor, the hope of thousands of families. Suddenly, an explosion ripped through the quiet air. A homemade mine had been buried in the road. Masked terrorists stormed out from the bushes, spraying AK-47 second at the drivers and their escorts. The attack was swift and brutal. When the rescue team arrived, the scene was horrific. The trucks were in flames. The soldiers and drivers had died heroically. And on the thirsty red earth, the precious white milk, the liquid gold of Burkina Faso, was flowing everywhere, mixing with blood and diesel fuel. The symbol of hope had been stained by cruelty. The news flew back to the capital like a hurricane. The joy of victory was extinguished, replaced by pain and fury. The price of freedom was truly dear. The war was no longer on the economic or media front. It had become a war of blood. The tragedy on the highway cast a dark, mournful shadow over all of Burkina Faso. The entire nation mourned for the drivers and soldiers who had fallen. On television, the images of flag-draped coffins being returned to their families broke the hearts of millions. These were no longer statistics. They were fathers, husbands, and sons. This pain belonged to everyone. In Adama's village, the people built a temporary memorial of stones and wildflowers. The old village chief, Issouf, who had always been skeptical, stood silently beside Adama, his old eyes fixed on the memorial flame. The pain had erased the line between hope and doubt, leaving only a shared sense of outrage. In the capital, pressure mounted on Ibrahim-Traore from all sides. The American partner, Aura Organics, while expressing deep condolences, had a board of directors that was extremely worried. Questions were raised about the security of the supply chain. Some government advisors, who had been fearful from the start, now had a reason to demand a halt. "We can't go on," a minister said in an emergency meeting. "Every shipment is now a life or death gamble. We are spilling our people's blood for milk. We must pause, re-evaluate." Their argument was not wrong. It was rational. It was safe. But for Traore, stepping back now meant failure. It would be a victory for the terrorists. That night, he appeared on national television, not in the polished suit of a politician, but in the combat fatigues of a soldier. He stood there, not as an economist, but as a commander-in-chief facing the enemy. "Today, the heart of our nation is bleeding," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to understand clearly. The terrorists did not attack a convoy of trucks. They attacked our future. They attacked the light in our children's eyes. They attacked the hope in the heart of every mother and father. They want us to live in fear, in darkness, in poverty, because that is the only soil where their ideology of hatred can grow." He paused, his eyes looking straight into the camera, as if looking into the eyes of every citizen. "And this is my answer to them. For every drop of milk they spilled, we will produce 1,000 more. For every life they took, we will save 1,000 more from the clutches of poverty. As of today, this is no longer an economic project. It is a sacred mission. It is our weapon in the war for the soul of our nation." Then he gave an order that changed everything. "I hereby announce the formation of the National Convoy Escort. I call on our soldiers, our veterans, and also our ordinary citizens, the able-bodied young men from the villages along the routes, to volunteer. Stand up and protect the fruits of your own labor. The government will provide weapons and training. From now on, every shipment will be a moving fortress, protected by the very people whose sweat and tears are in it." His call ignited a fire of defiance. The terrorists' plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of sowing fear, they had forged an ironclad unity. Adama was one of the first to sign up. The attack had taken a friend of his from the escort team. Now, this was his personal fight. Old Issouf, with his experience, helped organize the village militias, assigning shifts and mapping out dangerous spots. The women in the cooperative collected food and water for the convoys. The entire country had transformed into one giant military camp. A week later, the first convoy since the tragedy prepared to depart. The scene was completely different. Armored military vehicles were at the front and back, but sandwiched between the refrigerated trucks were dozens of civilian pickup trucks, filled with volunteers carrying rifles, their faces resolute. Along the roads, people poured out to wave, not in fear, but in pride. They gave the volunteer soldiers water, food, and their prayers. The journey was tense. Every shadow, every bend in the road could hide danger, but no attack came. The terrorists had been taken by surprise by the resistance of an entire nation. When the convoy rolled safely into the port, horns blared, mixing with the cheers of the port workers. It wasn't just a shipment that had arrived. It was a battle that had been won. It was a powerful message sent to the enemies of Burkina Faso and the entire world. We will not fall. We will not back down. The victory of the National Convoy Escort was not just a military victory. It was a victory of the spirit, and it spread across the globe like a wildfire. The story of a resilient people, from the old to the young, rising up to protect their own future, became a modern-day legend. International media channels, the same ones that once mocked them, now competed to send reporters to tell the story of the Sahel miracle. Ibrahim Traore was no longer seen as a military dictator, but was compared to the most inspiring leaders in history, a man who proved that courage can be the ultimate weapon. The response from the American partner, Awa Organics, exceeded all expectations. The company's CEO flew directly to Ouagadougou. In a joint press conference with President Traore, witnessed by the world, she didn't talk about risk. She talked about admiration. "We don't just see a business partner," she declared, her voice filled with emotion. "We see the indomitable spirit of humanity. Awa Organics will not only continue our contract, we have decided to double our order. Furthermore, we will establish a $1 million fund to support the families of the victims and to better equip the escort convoys." This act, a true gesture of solidarity between a Western corporation and an African nation, sent a powerful message. But the wave of influence didn't stop there. Burkina Faso's success lit a fire in neighboring countries. Leaders from Mali, Niger, Chad nations also struggling with poverty and extremism began to look towards Ouagadougou not with rivalry, but with hope. A historic summit was held, not in Paris or Geneva, but right in the capital of Burkina Faso. For the first time, the leaders of the Sahel region sat down together to discuss an African solution for African people. They agreed to form the Sahel Liquid Gold Alliance, an organization similar to OPEC, to jointly set quality standards, control prices, and share security protocols. They were taking back control of their own resources from outside powers. One nation's revolution was becoming the revolution of an entire region. And on the ground, the sweet fruits of victory were sprouting. In Adama's village, a new, sturdy building had risen. It was a primary school, built entirely with profits from the donkey milk project. At the opening ceremony, Adama stood next to the old chief Issouf. The school sign read, "Issouf Adama, Hope Primary School, an honor to both the wisdom of the past and the faith of the future." As old Issouf, the man who once said only the dust remains, tremblingly cut the ribbon, tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks. They were tears of joy. Not far away, a small health clinic had also just opened. The doctor in charge was a young woman who had grown up in the village and was able to attend medical school on a government scholarship funded by this very project. Now, she had returned to heal her own people, using donkey milk creams to treat skin conditions in children and providing nutritional supplements to fight malnutrition. This new wealth was completely different from the wealth of the old gold mines. It didn't flow into the pockets of a small elite only to disappear into Swiss bank accounts. It was distributed to millions of farmers. It built schools, not mansions. It funded health clinics, not luxury cars. It was healing the wounds of an entire nation. The story of Burkina Faso shows us that a nation's true wealth lies not in its ground, but in the hearts and minds of its people. They turned a symbol of hardship into an engine of hope. If this story of courage and self-determination has touched you, hit the subscribe button, because our journey to find world-changing stories is not over yet. Our journey ends here, but the story of Burkina Faso has just begun. It was never really about the donkeys. It was about seeing value where others saw only a burden. It was about finding strength where others saw only weakness. Ibrahim Traore and his people taught the world a priceless lesson. Freedom is not granted from lavish meeting rooms in the West. It is won from the soil of your homeland, with sweat, blood, and an unshakable vision. They prove that the greatest asset of a nation is not what they dig from the earth, but the dignity, unity, and courage within their hearts. The question this story leaves for each of us, no matter where you are, is this: what is your donkey? What is your secret, overlooked weapon? It could be a skill you possess, a cultural tradition, a local resource the world has ignored. Share in the comments, what is your donkey? What is your community's donkey? Because as Burkina Faso has shown, sometimes the world's greatest revolutions begin with the most humble of sounds,